feels like in the past few years, you and I have collectively lived through a dozen apocalypses. Let me paint you a picture. It was September 2020. The world was in a global pandemic, free fall, with no sign of a vaccine in sight. And I was a first year at Hopkins, doing my semester from home, which was in Portland, Oregon. But if I looked outside the door, what I would see was a dry, red Martian hellscape. The Pacific Northwest was experiencing some of its deadliest and most dangerous wildfires on record, exacerbated by the effects of climate change. We would try to stuff wet towels in the cracks under the door to try to prevent the smell of smoke from coming in, but even then, my world felt like a charred forest. If I looked outside, even at noontime, I looked out to see a world that looked like it was at dusk. It was red, it was ugly, and it was dark. All the while, I'd try to pay attention to the zoom on my screen, but my phone would keep ringing. I would get messages from my friends in the next county over saying that they were getting evacuated from their homes. But I tried my best to be a good student. I tried to listen to my calc TA explain to me how to solve the DiffyQ problem set for the week. And students here, they would raise their digital hands, they would unmute themselves to try to mansplain the problem that we all knew the answer to. And I was just struck with this feeling. The world is burning. Why does nobody seem to care? Of course, at the time, many students were here on the East Coast or in other parts of the world in this country. They weren't experiencing the same geographical realities as I was. But that feeling of urgency, of emergency, remained through the course of my next 3 years at Hopkins. Fast forward a few months, it was 2021, and I was finally on campus. And we received news that spring of the Atlanta spa shootings, which killed 8, 6 of whom were Asian women. And when the Sheriff County spokesperson was asked about why he thought these things happened, what he said was that the shooter just had a bad day. That's what the lives of people like myself, people like my community, people like my parents, my elders amounted to. A bad day. It was this feeling of frustration, this lack of recognition, that myself and many other Asian students on this campus came together to demand more of the university than just a square Instagram post expressing thoughts and prayers. Very quickly, we began to realize that this lack of representation in academic spaces at this university for Asian Americans was a similar feeling to that experienced by those in the African diaspora, in the indigenous diaspora, and the Latinx diasporas. So we came together to form a coalition of students to propose the critical diaspora studies major at this university that calls for a synthetic, a global and comparative approach that moves beyond the border and asks real questions about globalization, capital, white supremacy. It was through this next few months that we worked together as a group, as students, soliciting opinions from fellow undergraduates, from grad students, and from faculty, that we came together and drew together a proposal for the critical diaspora studies major. As it currently stands, there are 4 tracks: in migration and borders, global indigeneities, empires, wars, and carceralities, and transnational movements and solidarities. One extremely important part of our proposal to us is the junior year collaborative research component, where students will be paired with Baltimore community partners to work in conjunction and mutual bilateral relationship with our Baltimore community. We wanted to nod to the fact that this university has complex interrelationships with the city, and to give back to the communities in which we find ourselves for these 4 years. Right now, this proposal is in front of the Homewood Academic Council. With any luck, we'll be in front of the Maryland Department of Higher Education in the spring. But even then, I experienced doubt. I second-guessed myself. I asked if I was taking up too much space. The reason why, let me explain, is when I was telling people what we were trying to achieve, we understandably received some questions. What was a group of STEM students doing trying to propose a major on the cutting edge of the humanities? I asked myself if I really had a space in this discussion. People would recommend books to us. They would say, read this book about organizers at UC Berkeley, at San Francisco State, where some of the first ethnic studies departments were created in this country. I read those books and I didn't see myself as those political firebrands. I saw myself as somebody just trying to pass neuroanatomy. And so it was out of this feeling of imposter phenomenon, of doubt and guilt, that I turned to the archive. I wanted to know what political action at Hopkins has looked like in years past. So to send us on a brief whirlwind tour, we start in the 70s, which featured some of the largest student-led action on this campus we've ever seen. Hundreds of students gathered in order to protest the Vietnam War. We even occupied Homewood House, which is now Homewood Museum. In the 80s, a group of students led by students in the geology department created what they called shantytowns on the Charles Street median and in front of the Shriver Quad in order to protest JHU investment in companies in South Africa during apartheid. My not-so-favorite fun fact of this era is that a group of frat bros had decided to firebomb one of the shantytowns, which resulted in major burns for one student and the eventual expulsion of these frat bros. Later, moving into the 90s, what we get is a recurring cast of characters in the Black Student Union, the BSU, and the IAC, the Inter-Asian Council. Both are clubs that are still very active today. What we see is that in 1992, the BSU released a set of 16 demands to the university, saying several of these demands coalescing around the need for a Black Studies major at this campus. In direct response, a group of Asian students said, hey, we have demands too. Released their own set of 12 demands coalescing around the need for an Asian Studies major. And while these students were at Hopkins, committees were formed, reports were written, discussions were had with admin. But after they graduated, after their 4 years at this university, much of this political movement, this momentum, fizzled out. It wasn't until 2002 when a club called JH Unity came together to propose what we now call the Center for Africana Studies, and is now our equivalent of the Black Studies major that was called for in decades past. It's clear that over the course of these decades, students have been responding to changes in the social world and have been asking of this administration for accountability. I didn't have to see myself in the Berkeley organizers when I could see myself as just a Hopkins student. Those feelings of self-doubt, of imposter phenomenon began to dissolve. Even as early as the 60s, students in the physics department said, hey, I think we need a Black Studies major at this campus. In the 80s, it was students in the geology department who said, I don't think it's right that this university profits off of unjust systems of apartheid. In the 90s, those recurring students, our recurring cast of characters, are people who now you can look up today are physicians. It didn't matter academic discipline as much as it required their political action to do things that they believed in at that time, in that moment. Asian Americans are often written out of the political history of this country. And this school is so often seen as tragically pre-professional. What this history shows is that it doesn't have to be mutually exclusive. In fact, they can be mutually constitutive. I began to see myself in a world where I didn't get to see myself in history textbooks. Asian Americans are often erased from the political narratives of our histories. We're told that we don't belong. We're told that we had no place here. So in a world where I didn't get to see myself, I got to see a sense of lineage, a sense of political inheritance in the Hopkins students of past decades. In a country where myself, my parents, my community are seen as foreigners, I get to see myself in these pages. And so it was for these reasons that I stopped feeling like I was taking up too much space, that my voice was too loud. 4 years ago, I started at this university, and I felt like the world was burning and I was alone. Now, I get to see myself with a community of the past and a community of the present. Now, when I walk to campus on the Gilman Quad, I'm not thinking about how late I am. I'm thinking about the hundreds of students that gathered in front of Gilman to protest military recruitment on campus during the Vietnam War. I think about their signs. I think about their voices. When I'm walking in front of Levering, I'm not just thinking of the sandwiches or the walk. I'm thinking of the students who decided to protest and to hold listening sessions for the need for a Black Studies major on this campus in the early 2000s, just right as I was being born. Ultimately, this campus has become alive for reasons and ways that I could have never imagined sitting in my own room at home. I thought that I was alone, and I discovered that I wasn't. Now, attending political events, political gatherings with members of CDS in the community, I get to come home and say, I can't wait to see these same people, the people with whom I stood shoulder to shoulder with our signs and our voices in class the next day. Ultimately, at its core, this is the vision for CDS. It's one of a coalition. It's one of a community. So often, I hear at this university, if I could just get past this next exam, then I can think about and learn more about this issue that I see my friends posting about on Instagram. If I can just get to graduation, then I can get into the real world and become involved in this political movement that I'm really interested in. If I just keep my head down, get to where I need to be, then and only then can I look up and see the world at its eye. My response to that is, the world is burning. What are we waiting